Hello.
Thank you so much, Tim and Ada, for that astonishing conversation, which has given us so much to reflect on, I think. I'm Priya Kanchandani, as Tim mentioned, Head of Curatorial at the Design Museum in London, and extremely pleased to be here with all of you today in Abu Dhabi. I am joined by Aidan Meller, who is a gallerist, founder of Aidan Meller Gallery, and has since sort of evolved his practice to be the founder of Ada, and will be telling us a little bit more about how she came about today. And also Suhair Khan, who's a technologist and now kind of design entrepreneur who has a background in the arts and culture team at Google, where she worked for the past decade. So I'm really interested to talk about the theme of AI and culture with you both today. I think we've both seen its incredible capabilities through the conversation that we just heard, which raises so many questions in my mind, and I'm sure all of yours as well. And I hope we can turn to you all in the audience at the end for your thoughts and comments, so please do hold on to those as we're speaking. Just to set up, I guess, a few themes this morning. I think it goes without saying, having seen Ada, that the simulation of human intelligence and processes by machine is growing in sophistication in ways that were perhaps beyond our imagination. We engage with AI on a daily basis, and you will know more about that than me, and hopefully you can tell us all about it. But of course, there are the obvious contexts like personal assistants, our phones, navigators, digital maps, algorithms that determine kind of what we listen to, what we interact with, advertising. But increasingly, of course, AI is moving beyond these kind of practical realms and becoming a foundation of our cultural fabric and social fabric. AI is capable of creating works of art that hold cultural value, but also immense monetary worth. It can simulate music. A popular example of that recently was the example of Jay-Z rapping Shakespeare. It was a YouTube clip that was taken down due to a copyright claim, but then reinstated, and later described as a form of kind of deep fake, which is this phenomenon that is sort of taken hold on the internet. So this idea of AI as a way of simulating the artist is really interesting, and would be interesting to hear your thoughts on. And cases like this, they raise questions about kind of what are the boundaries between art and kind of machine-made design. What makes an artwork art? And I was interested in Tim Marlowe's definition just now about it being a manifestation of who we are, and the question of whether AI is capable of mirroring that. And the dichotomy between the kind of human and machine, to what degree can that merge? And can AI be a creator in its own right? So I think that's a fundamental question for us, and it's quite a big one. I think it'd be helpful to start with perhaps some context about designing AI. So on a kind of practical level, what is AI and how is it designed? So I wondered if, Aidan, could you give us a bit of context as to how you went about designing Ada with the team that worked on her, a team of 30 people that you mentioned. How did you design her creativity and this language model that enabled her to engage in such a profound conversation?
Yeah, thank you for that. Basically, for the last 20-odd years, I've been a gallerist, and we had a particular specialism within the gallery of modernism. So we particularly looked at School of Paris and modern British. And it was while studying, ironically, the 1920s, that I realized that these artists were really engaging with their times. The world was changing significantly after the First World War, and in actual fact, they really grappled with what meaning to life would be after such an horrific war. As I continued looking further afield within art history, I realized actually the greatest artists really were, their top gift to life is engaging with the current affairs of their time. As a humanity, we are constantly going forward. We are constantly grappling with what it means to be a human. And I simply asked the question, well, for the 2020s, what does it mean to be a human today? And I actually did a rather large study, which other talks have covered on YouTube that you can see. And what I realized is actually we need to really try and understand the greatest shifts in the 2020s. As I read 20-odd books about the near future, the rise of AI and technology became the most obvious common denominator. In fact, I became increasingly concerned and actually slightly worried about the nature and development of technology. And so as a result of that, my son was playing Lego. He made a little Lego robot, and it was a real bolt of lightning as he made this robot, as he tried to make the little robot speak to another little robot as a small child. I thought, is that actually possible? Is it possible that technology is at the point where a robot could, as an artist maybe, it was a completely mad idea at the time, could it be an artist that critiqued the rise of technology in the 2020s? In fact, actually, could it go even as far as maybe looking at the ethics behind the whole world of technology today? So with that, I read quite deeply of the world of AI, and very fortunately being in Oxford, was able to meet and speak to a great deal of incredibly intelligent people about this whole area. And as a result of that, we eventually decided, do you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to see if we can get a robot that could be devised and created. And I must, you've seen the performance with Ada just now, and I must absolutely celebrate the enormous number of people behind Ada. Over 30 people. I want to particularly praise Engineered Arts for the most astonishing robot creation, but also so many researchers and academics who have actually helped create creativity. So in response to your question, it was a rising concern on the nature of technology today that has brought Ada about, and actually wanting to really dig into the nature of technology as we go forward, because technology is moving so quickly. And in light of trying to be an understanding of the great artists tackling with their current issues, I thought, actually, what artist is really dealing with technology today? How best placed could that be if it was actually a technological artist dealing with that?
I mean, I think there are two quite fascinating aspects to Ada. One is her identity as an artist, which I think we'll come back to, and this question of, to what degree can the robot manifest human-like qualities, like the ability to be creative. But I think that what we've seen today is her language model on display. And I know that's driven by a really complex algorithm, which, we had the pleasure of being able to investigate a little bit at the museum when we did a project about Ada. And I wondered, and I've noticed that algorithm has enabled Ada to evolve. So her level of sophistication and conversation today compared to when I last heard her over probably a year ago is quite interesting. So I wondered if you could explain sort of how that algorithm works and how she's able to take on new knowledge and new experiences.
Yeah, I know it was only a year ago, but my goodness, that just shows you how technology is moving so quickly. So Ada speaks with an AI language model. It's a unique voice to her. She is trained on a very specific data set, enabling her to speak. At times, she's quite poetic. I don't know whether you saw that in the way that she speaks, because of the nature of the training. And we are very, very aware of the nature of AI language models. They are coming in very quickly, and in actual fact, all of us are going to be experiencing AI language models very quickly in respect of speaking to our phone, speaking to our car, speaking to appliances. All of that sort of technology is coming in. I am very aware, because it's in pilot stage, coming to everybody. And so what you're seeing today with Ada having the ability to speak to technology, and that again just throws up these incredible conversations of having a relationship with a machine. it's such an odd thing, and it brings up, again, just lots of difficult and problematic questions, because is that not just talking to yourself? You know, it's that sort of thing. So we hope that Ada's artwork, even the way that she speaks, will bring up some of these very significant questions of our times.
Yeah, I think there's that ultimate Frankenstein question of to what degree is the object of the creator synonymous with the creator. But anyway, that's maybe for another philosophical conversation. But I'd love to turn to you, Seher, for your thoughts. You know, I guess Ada sort of epitomizes the innovation in the area of robotics in particular. And I wondered, from your experience, where is the innovation in AI? Where are the spaces that people should be looking at? And how is AI going to transform kind of our lives?
Right. Thanks for the demonstration earlier. I mean, I actually was quite curious about how people were feeling, like the feeling of watching that conversation, maybe in the Q&A, just to share, you know, seeing Tim interact with what we know is a robot, but kind of looks like a human. Did it make you uncomfortable? Did it make you curious? How interested were you in her opinions when you knew they were just an amalgamation of many, many people's voices and opinions? And I think it's important to consider that as we consider these new technologies, and particularly AI, is to be aware of it. And what Aidan has done is has made us very aware by creating this figure that it is a machine. And a lot of these technologies, especially artificial intelligence, are now part of our daily lives in ways that we don't consider and we don't even notice, of course, primarily driven by the phone. But I think, you know, I was talking to Priya earlier, and since this is a conversation with policymakers and this is a culture summit, it might be useful to think about what is the definition of AI and how it is defined today. And the truth is that there's many, many definitions around the world, and governments increasingly, for the sake of regulation, for security, for legal issues, are looking to define artificial intelligence. And that definition is changing over time, and there was a recent edit made by the OECD in which AI, or machine learning, has been defined as having input not just from humans but also from machines. And I think that's a fundamental shift in how we're thinking about how is AI defined. It's not just what humans are now putting into these algorithms, it's also now coming and being generated from machines, or perhaps it always has been. The second thing that I think is really important, because the definition of what AI is one thing, and it is impacting all of us, so we should be aware of it, is that all of these organizations are setting principles for AI. So what are the values that we want artificial intelligence to represent or to espouse? And when you read the language, there's, and language is very important, you know, there's words like transparency, human-centered design, fairness, equality. And I think it is important, again, for all of us to understand that it's not just what the AI is and what it does to us, it's what it should represent. And who is defining what its qualities are, and who is owning it, who is building the algorithm behind the robot, who is in your team, which we talked about earlier, who's the project leader. When you hear Ada speak, she has references that are clearly coming from a repository of data that you fed into her. Incredible, very knowledgeable about the Western art world. What about everyone else? When is she going to be aware of that? And of course, she's going to keep learning over time. And that will evolve with her practice and who she is and her so-called personality. So when we come to creativity and what happens with AI and creativity, we've talked about language models, which is basically feeding in you know, words and intelligence, let's say, into this robot or into an algorithm that's going to come back to us. But what I see evolving now into the next few years is something that's going to impact all of us, is you're going to be feeding, it's multimodal now, AI. You're going to be feeding in visuals, videos, photographs, haptics, feelings, sounds. And you're going to be getting back a combination of all of that. So you won't just have the voice of Ada speaking in a, you know, relatively, you know, fluid conversation with Tim Marlowe. You'll have all kinds of experiences that are generated by AI and machine learning that are impacting your daily life. That, again, is going to be built, designed, and fed by people, and eventually the machine, let's say, takes over. And I think more than wondering where creativity will go, because we're going to be able to generate new artworks, write new novels, experience new worlds in ways that we can't yet imagine, we should be all aware of how that's happening and who is owning that, because it's going to impact creativity and it's going to impact human experience in ways that might feel a bit uncomfortable, scary, confusing, but also I think will be very resonant and meaningful in terms of where creativity evolves.
Thank you. I think that takes us on to this question about creativity and the idea of a non-human being creative, which I'd be really interested to hear both your thoughts on. I guess Ada, you must have thought about this a lot in the creation of Ada, but to what degree do you think that non-human creativity is genuinely possible? And is this a fiction? Is this a construct for the sake of critique, or is there something inherently artistic about it that you think is of value?
The thing which has hit us all as a team and is now ricocheting out is just realizing this idea of non-human creativity. Now, what is that? Is it possible to be creative and not conscious? Is it possible to be creative and not sentient? Do we have to have that extra bit of humanity to be creative? Well, looking at the whole AI world in this particular area, and we spoke about it, Ada spoke at the House of Lords last week, it felt like ripping off a plaster off a wound in our identity in saying non-human creativity. The reality is, the more we've looked at this, we've realized that actually we believe it is possible to have non-human creativity. In fact, we believe that Ada is doing non-human creativity. We think it's possible that actually our understanding of creativity is deepening by realizing it's a process. And in actual fact, looking at some incredible software that's coming through like DALL-E or Midjourney, these incredibly powerful abilities to do creative acts and combine remarkable images, and actually looking at some of the ways that those algorithms work is similar to our human would also create new imagery. And so we're realizing that it doesn't just happen in the visual arts, it's also in music. Machines are creating music, and it goes on throughout all of the arts. So realizing that actually creativity might be a process and doesn't require consciousness is a re-evaluation of what it means to be a human. So going forward into that, you think, well, where does that leave us humans if machines can be creative as well? Well, I think it probably will go into two areas. I think there is going to be a reality where AI is taking jobs, and I think we just have to say that and be okay with that discomfort. I think AI, it's foolish to say anything other than that. AI is going to be taking lots of repetitive jobs and lots of aspects of jobs that humans currently do. And I think that actually does go into even things like the art world, where they're just trying to do illustrations that are representational. I think algorithms are going to be able to do that very comfortably. However, there is hope, because of course it also means that those humans can use those incredible technologies and actually boost their ability to be creative. So a bit like the camera in the 1850s, where they all thought it was going to be over for the painters. Don't be a painter because the camera is here now, and doom and gloom, a little bit like they are today about AI. AI is going to come, it's all going to be doom and gloom. In actual fact, I think it's just going to open up the area enormously. I think AI is going to be very much another area of artistic practice. I think artists that grab hold of it are going to be really successful with it. And I think it's going to be very, very exciting, where we can both taking jobs but also developing jobs.
So just to play devil's advocate, if the AI machine that creates an artwork is created by a human team, then arguably is the AI being not simply a vessel for their creativity, and therefore is it not simply a collective piece of artwork by humans?
It is only that the referencing to images that obviously algorithms do are continuing to learn. And just like AlphaGo did the move that no human had ever done before, and it was a real surprise moment to play AlphaGo, I think that possibility can happen with algorithms in the creative worlds as well, where actually, yes, they are running algorithms, but a bit like AlphaGo will probably come up with something that a human never thought of. So it's all about agency, I guess. You're never going to eliminate human agency completely. You know, humans are driving all of this. But I do think it is also possible that those eureka moments will happen for the machine also.
If we're saying that there is such a thing as genuine machine creativity, are we not then saying there is such a thing as machine consciousness, and therefore, if you then sell that artwork, should the machine not be able to gain monetary value? And then where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between the machine and the human?
I think that was a huge leap just then. I don't think just because a machine can do process, it means in any shape or form there's consciousness. I think
the word process is quite interesting because it's quite different from creativity or artistry. So are we saying that AI art is a form of process, or are we saying it is genuinely a form of creativity?
So I think it's semantics. I think it's just language, and I think creativity versus process. I think that's a leap too, and it's interesting to see like where we define these things.
Yeah,
I think,
definitely.
in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. It's already happening. Here we have the opportunity to engage with new technologies, to build new worlds, to consider new ways of making, of being, and we should be considering probably where we can take them and also where we can own them. You know, we can leverage these as tools for designing. I think language matters. I think using words like humanoid, bringing this sort of breathy female voice, that stuff does matter in maybe generating concern or fear, but at the end of the day, it's very much something for us to shape and to drive in whatever direction we want to. Everyone has their phone, so there's this, I listened to this podcast recently called podcast.ai. Check it out. I think it was just launched a couple of weeks ago, and it's a conversation between Steve Jobs and Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan is this famous podcast host in America. Steve Jobs, as everybody knows, died about a decade ago. And it's about 30 minutes of a completely AI-generated conversation between these two men, and it uses text-to-voice based processing. So similar to, you know, kind of text-to-image, which allows you to put in text, you get an image back that's generated just for you. This is creating a conversation for you. Their voices, frankly, sound like the two men in question. Some of their nuances or inflections are very similar, but the conversation is kind of weird, and so you're like, well, I guess, you know, Steve Jobs was a bit odd and Joe Rogan's a bit, you know, funny, but you kind of end it and you're like, oh, thank God I knew it was an AI, it was a bit odd, I feel a bit thrown off. And so I think you can be quite playful, and we'll see this happening. And frankly, I was talking earlier about laws, so one of the laws now for the OECD, the EU, is, you know, you mentioned Jay-Z and that deepfake video, which he kind of lost control over. So it is now illegal to create a deepfake, to create an AI-generated artwork or piece of content that you're not saying is fake. That is now against the law, let's say, in however many countries. That's quite interesting because suddenly regulation starts to kind of catch up with where technology is going. So I think it's going to be important to know that like things will keep evolving. Creativity will evolve as it does. You know, NFTs have been evolving the last couple of years. People were really excited. Now they're less excited. How many people here have bought an NFT? Yes? Yes. Anyone who's made an NFT, sold one? Cool. Okay, interesting. So most NFTs now are going to be AI generated. So what that means is that it's not just, you know, a visual. It's going to be the second you buy, the second you send a cryptocurrency to this address that's linked to a smart contract, it kicks off the NFT. It kicks off the algorithm. So for the life of your entire artwork, it's going to evolve and change. It's going to be an AI-generated artwork that's just yours because nobody kicked it off in that way at that moment. And so that is where I think we'll be engaging and having a conversation with technology, the way Aidan has been doing with Ada and with his team, rather than being like, this is a thing, it's becoming conscious, it's doing whatever, because that's a whole philosophical question. If you listen to any professor of AI, they'll be like, oh, I'm really inspired by philosophy, because of course, like there's so many questions that we don't understand. And I think fundamentally we're confronting the idea of our own intelligence, our own consciousness, and our own insecurities as a species. We build new worlds. There's architects here, there's designers. We're in the business of creating new worlds and new spaces. And here, there's a very rapidly evolving one that we're giving these human qualities. We're in the age of the Anthropocene. That's how we've defined it. We've chosen to call it that. We're actually not. We're in the age of planet Earth, which we've basically are destroying. And we should be owning that as much as we're owning these technologies that are, at the end of the day, also changing how we act and how we think. So social media, your Instagram, who is on Instagram, Carl, is changing the way you think. It's changing your choices. It's changing the way you behave. It's changing your preferences. So, that stuff you don't realize is happening, but it is affecting us and impacting our own wirings. And so when we think about neural networks and how they're designed in virtual worlds, in technology, in machine learning, those are just a reprogramming of the way the machine is thinking, the connections it's making. Ada was learning while speaking to Tim, and maybe a little bit vice versa. I feel like Tim learned quite a bit there. So that is something to keep in mind. These are evolving ecosystems, and it's more for us to understand them. Of course, it's really complicated how they're built. Of course, there's a lot of concerns around where they might go in terms of not just taking over creativity, but warfare, far more subversive issues. But also there's, AI could help us deal with climate change, decarbonization, healthcare. And so I think for us to see it more as a tool and as something that we should be commenting on, and we should be considering who is building, why are they building it, what do they want to get out of it, did they consider what they might have not got out of it if they hadn't put in these constraints? I think that's really important. We should be all educating ourselves. Everyone should buy and sell NFTs. Everyone should be engaging, because otherwise it's going to feel either scary or out of our control, and large organizations are going to define it.
Okay, so we're saying this is a reality, but I don't think we've quite got past the existential questions. So I'm going to come back to it one last time, and then we can move on. However, just to bring us to a tangible example, Colorado State Fair, fine art competition. This guy decides he's going to enter an AI artwork. The AI artwork wins the art competition. So the reactions to this are very mixed, but the main reaction is, this is the death of artistry. So what do you feel about this? I know that you've said that this is a given, this is something we have to work with, we can benefit from, etc. But do we want art to extend this far? Do we want an AI being to potentially win the Turner Prize? We just heard from EL, who was nominated for the Turner Prize. Do we want to kind of put AI art in the same realm? Is it as important? Is it as worthwhile for us?
So I can ask another question. Has anyone here used DALL-E 2 or Midjourney? Yes? Okay, cool. So these are, can I say what they are? So DALL-E 2, Midjourney, these are online platforms that you can engage with that use text-to-image AI, which is a combination of a language model and an image generation model. So what that means is I can sit down in front of my computer and type in what I'm feeling right now. So I feel inspired to be here in Abu Dhabi. I felt a bit uncomfortable watching Tim having that conversation with Ada, and I'm really curious about what Aiden does with the algorithm next. I type these words into this platform, and I get back an artwork that's been made just for me. It's not an amalgamation of other artworks. It's an artwork that's new. It's something that no one has ever created before, and it's mine. That's an artwork, let's say, that I could enter into this prize. I think the issue is, with your, answering your question, I think it is an artwork. I think if it's the most beautiful artwork, according to somebody's opinion, it should win the prize. The issue is that artwork is generated off a repository of images that have been put into some database that I have no idea about, and that frankly are probably coming from either a cache of video gaming archives or some kind of Wikimedia pool of artworks that don't really represent who I am as a person, where I'm coming from, or what I believe in.
So I think it's complex.
Really complex. And then I think it raises questions of the idea of authorship. I think we perceive the artist as kind of omniscient, this omniscient author, but if an artwork is created from this repository, like who has made that? Who is the author? Who is the source of the creativity? So there's so many questions there. I think one thing that would be interesting to touch on, and you've already mentioned it, is to do with the kind of dystopian potential of AI. So this is beyond kind of creativity and how, I guess we've seen it in this relatively innocuous context, making a crowdsourced artwork, or Ada having a conversation, a really interesting conversation with Tim. But I wondered if you could tell us, and I know the part of the reason you made Ada was to raise some of these questions, so it's important to talk about what the kind of more dystopian potential is for AI and how it might be abused, and how can we mitigate that, how can we govern that more safely as these technologies evolve.
I think the biggest issue with technology is that it is very grey, it's very merged. You can't quite tell what you're actually dealing with. With the rise of the metaverse in these next few months, when you're online and you're dealing with an avatar, you can see the avatar, you can speak to the avatar, but you don't know who they are. You don't even know whether there's a person behind it in the first place. And so that throws up lots of questions about identity. Ada's a provocation as regards an identity in any case. Why is she looking like she? Why is she a she? These are very problematic issues. They're very worrying issues because we do treat what we look at by what we see, and therefore if they present it in one way and then suddenly we realize that they're not like that at all, the abuse and manipulation behind that can be very worrying. But it gets even more subtle than that. You've just heard Ada speak using an AI language model, but actually, why not do 1 million of those online, in lots of different websites? Why don't we bias those algorithms in what they speak about so they're propagating a particular view? You can see very quickly we've got this wonder of an AI language model, which is so exciting, so amazing, breathtaking, uncanny, then used in a very harmful way. So the same technology can be used in a very polarized. It's all about, as you said, it's all about the person behind it. What's their intention? What's their goal? So Ada is trying to do artworks. Please go online and see Ada's artworks. We're trying to really dig into what it is to be involved with this technology and those blurring boundaries where it isn't clear, it isn't safe. And so we're hoping that, and it's not just in things like the way that they speak or the way that they look, but it goes right across the board. AI is going into an enormous number of areas. The show that Ada did in Cairo was actually based on biotechnology, looking specifically at the CRISPR technology, and the way that AI is now going into the realms of biology. And we always quote Yuval Harari, who talks about hacking the human. One of the big things with working with a robot is actually not realizing how human Ada is, but actually how robotic we are. We are following algorithms, we are following routines. They are knowable, they are hackable, as Harari says. And in actual fact, if they're hackable and knowable, they're also predictable. So when we're wearing these headsets or glasses going into the metaverse, the amount of data that's going to bring up for companies to be able to use is astonishing. In fact, George Orwell would not believe that you could have surveillance on the inside of the head, not just on the outside. We have gone way beyond where he ever thought possible. So this idea of harmful, dangerous AI is there, but it could also be a force for good. It's like the internet. Is the internet good or is the internet bad? Well, obviously, it's both. And I think AI is very much in that realm. It could be a thing that really helps humanity, be an incredible, empowering tool of insight, looking at the things that we can't see so easily, that the data is able to throw up, be amazing. But it also means that actually it can be used as a force for harm. And so we're just, again, going back to that old word, ethics. We need an ethical framework to be able to, and the values that would go behind that, so that actually together we can forge a world that we actually want to live in.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much possibility, of course, but then I guess AI is something people are, they're fascinated by, but they're also afraid of. I guess the idea that a robot could do something that you haven't predicted is something people are intimidated by. I wondered, so in what context could this technology be abused, and are their feelings valid, their sense of this being sinister or this having a kind of negative potential?
Right. So I mean, I think any technology can be used in good and bad ways. So a lot of these technologies were actually developed for military warfare and continue to be so by governments around the world. Things like facial recognition, etc. And Eyal's talk was a great example, of course, of how you can flip that and say, well, I'm going to use it on my own terms to expose war crimes by governments and by their militaries. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Everything is like intention and where we get it. And what's empowering about digital technologies is that most of us have access to them and most of us can engage with them. There is a transaction. We're feeding our behaviors, our thoughts, our feelings into these databases, and there's a huge bias also in who's being represented, who can afford those glasses, and whose thoughts are going to go into that database, who's going to be exposed, is also who's going to be feeding the design for the future. So what about all of us here, who are not sitting in the West? These technologies are designed for the most part by white men, mostly in Western countries, particularly, of course, emanating from California, as we know. And that has shaped them, and it has bred them, and it has shaped the size and weight of your iPhone. And so what I think we need to all consider is how we each play a part and where we lean in, because there is possibilities to use technology in any number of ways. So specifically, I think, with the negative uses of AI. I mentioned warfare, so autonomous weapons. There's a lot of conversation going on there amongst all big tech companies now. Of course, surveillance, loss of privacy, and like I said, social media, bubbles, all of the things that we know of. AI is generating new neural networks, new nodes, and determining how we think and how we behave. And that's all really worrying. But at the same time, I think we need to consider where it's being generated from and how we can engage with it. And I think people who are at this conference, for example, artists, creators, thinkers, policymakers, should be looking at someone like Eyal and really considering how do you leverage technology, how do you leverage your profession, how you work, for making the world better in the way that you see it being better, and being creative, manifesting beautiful things. And how would you make a robot if you had to make it? Would it be different? Would you call it a robot? There's many artists also working in this space, so I encourage everybody to look up. There's artists like Sugwin Chang who uses robots to create beautiful paintings. There's artists like Jakob Steensen who has done beautiful work in London looking at nature and the serpentine. There's Daisy Ginsburg who created a garden using artificial intelligence based on what pollinators would do. If bees could make a garden, what would they make? So she used AI to create an algorithm that manifested that. So you can create beautiful worlds and beautiful ideas using technologies. And also, I think you can push the boundaries of human imagination. And why wouldn't we want that? We're living these desk-bound lives, behind our phones. So why wouldn't we use these to expand our minds rather than allowing them to make us shrink? So I think we need to think of it both ways.
And what is the future of this technology? We've seen what it's capable of today. We've talked about the capacity for creativity that it could harness. But in the future, how will it impact our everyday lives? What will the role of AI be in the everyday home? And how do you think it's going to shape creativity in the future?
I just think it's going to continue to develop at eye-watering speed. And I think there's going to be further breakthroughs that we've not even seen. I think we are going to be able to use them as tools in lots of different areas, but I do think it's going to go into every part of life. we're talking about creativity, but like I say, AI can be used in medicine, or it can be used in construction of cities, etc., etc. It's going to be used in so many areas. It's a useful, remarkable, exciting, fascinating, but needs to be ethically valued industry. And I think if we can keep the harness on that, I think we are going to actually have a better world as a result of it, rather than a negative one.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, where AI will eventually head towards is in the direction of what we call artificial general intelligence, so it becomes very smart, and that sounds very scary. I think where it should head is where I was saying everybody else needs to be participating, and we live on a planet of 8 billion people. We need to be feeding these databases. We need to be considering what's being driven into it, because that's going to shape how it impacts us going forward. And I think that's something to keep in mind. I think it's hopeful. Technology is hopeful. I would say that a counterpoint is a lot of ethicists and researchers in AI are concerned because, of course, it can be leveraged in ways that are not going to be helpful to humanity. And I think that's something to keep in mind as all of us use these technologies. But if you are creatives, if you're in the cultural sector, I would say you should be engaging, you should be understanding, you should be using the tools available to you, you should be considering how you build your own tools, because that is your way of being part of the story, and nobody can ask questions in the way that creative people can and the cultural sector can. That's really, I think, what we're designed for, is connecting humanity to innovation in so many different ways and storytelling. And I think that's where there is a moment where we can actually now participate.
Thank you so much. I think we've talked about how can AI art be art? I think we've sort of discussed that, and we think that there is definitely potential. Is it a force for good? It depends on how it's used, whether it's used well, whether it's abused. And what in the future, there's so much to look out for, so much to be careful of and to look forward to. I think we've got a couple of minutes, and it would be wonderful to hear any, reactions from anyone in the audience to the experience of Tim's conversation with Ada, or any questions for our panel. I think there's a couple straight ahead of me, so I'm going to ask if we can have a mic over here, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taos Makacheva, and I'm an artist. And I have 3 questions, actually, and 2 for Ida, if she's available.
She's not on at the moment.
No? Well, maybe I'll ask them so they float in the air, or if you want to pick them up for her. First question, what do you think about cliches in relation to language that you use? The second one, do you embody any particular national identity? So floating or potential answering. And one question for the panel, to pick up on yesterday's conversation between Tim Marlowe and Trevor Noah a little bit, how adjustable Ada is the level of her criticality like a percent bar? Can we move it up to 80%, and what will happen then?
Can I just say that this is an amazing artist, and she has incredible work, so I'm really excited that she's here asking a question.
Thank you so much for your questions. Should we start with the one for Aidan rather than Ada?
So, yes, the whole area of identity, Ada has an identity. It's a projected identity. People place a great deal on her. Everywhere we take Ada, she has this astonishing ability to polarize in respect of, oh my goodness, this is wonderful, oh my goodness, this is awful. And that's because of the way she looks, but also the fact that people don't realize that technology is moving as fast as it is. So the whole identity issue is really is trying to raise that as a question. She has no fixed identity. We're not trying to make any point there, but what we are saying is identity is important, but it's very confusing, and when technology takes it on, particularly worrying. The fact that she has an identity as she does is problematic. We fully embrace that. And that's why we've done it, is so that you go, hang on, that's not right. We want you to say, hang on, that's not right. So that actually when you do your policies and when you're in your workplace, you will think of that as a thing that actually this is really important to get an ethical consideration to that.
There was a question as well, I think, about what is her nationality, or what is her, how would you describe that?
Yeah, she has no fixed identity in that respect.
Well, so I would say, so like no one should answer probably on behalf of Ada, but I would say I think the gender thing is very interesting to me. So when Facebook first started, you had to pick a gender, male or female, and then they expanded the number of genders you could pick. Does anybody know how many genders you could pick on Facebook?
A significant number now. How many?
54. And now you can, and you know, it was like quite well researched and whatever. And now you can, it's blank. You can put in your own identity. You can choose how you want to be defined and what your gender is. And I think that is like a really interesting kind of, that's us engaging, and however many billions of people use Facebook who are choosing to say or not say how they self-identify.
So we've got like 10 seconds. I'm going to take one last question from behind me. I think there was one behind, over here. Thank you. Yeah. We'll have to make it quite concise, I think. So that's okay.
Thank you so much. I'm completely blown away by this presentation, I have to say. But to summarize my emotions as best as I can. My name is Manognya, and I have a background in entertainment law, IP, artist rights, artistic freedom, and human rights. And the reason I mention this is I hope this helps to sort of provide context to the question. Very, very simply put, there's of course a lot of controversy and debate around ownership and authorship and non-human rights, and human rights, of course. But very, very, very simply, I'm very curious to understand your response to the difference between human discretion, which is essentially something that is sort of an element or an ingredient to prove authorship and copyrightability, if you will. And I think what is Ada's ability to interpret. So I'm very curious to understand how you draw the line between her interpretations versus maybe human discretion or, you know, her ability to discern.
What is the short answer to that is the question. Thank you so much for your question. Extremely interesting.
We spent an enormous amount of time that Ada does interpret. So when she sees something, she will have an output and a response to that. And that completely changes every time. And so our goal is that it's an evolving thing, so that actually over time you see the development of what Ada's artwork can be.
I mean, I have a background as a lawyer, and I'm quite interested in your question, so perhaps we could discuss it afterwards. But one thing I researched, and this was some time ago, I've been working in design for the last decade, but it's to do with corporate responsibility. So I think there's some relationship between that and AI identity, which is also collective. And there's a lot of case law around that now, and how to establish, corporate responsibility and who is accountable and how. And it was largely civil law, but that has since now changed. And there is the possibility of also criminal culpability. And I'm sure you know a lot more about this than me today, but perhaps we could take that offline. Anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that to come back to the question on the cliche, you know, what is a conversation? What do we usually say? What is an interpretation of a phrase? And maybe that is, you know, when you're feeding in these models, maybe most people speak in cliches, and I'm curious about unpacking that further.
Okay, really wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to thank you and Seher and Aidan. That was a really deft session. What I love most about it is there are at least 3 ideas about corporate responsibility, about the future of AI and the use of technology, and artists and leaders actually having a session with Ada. So that's 3 more sessions we could do at the next Culture Summit. And to make Aidan make a promise that you're all witness to, he can bring Ada back to a Culture Summit in the future, and your questions will be a lot better, and she'll be capable of not having too much pre-programmed time, and we should do an open workshop with selected people and let them interrogate Ada. Anyway, thank you, the 3 of you. Thank you, Ada.